For the last couple of days, probably a week and a half, I've been toying with the idea of a perfect pet build for Remnant 2. Kind of the idea of having a build that does a lot of the work for you, and you can sort of just stand around in the background, drinking a beer, being cool, and staying out of the fire. I think we're pretty much there when it comes to this build here. And while we are explaining this build and looking into all of the different things that make it tick, I'm going to splice in some footage of me fighting the Night Weaver on Apocalypse with probably the two most toxic affixes that she can have, Hearty and Thickskin, which this makes her a whole lot more tankier than she should rightfully be, but was still able to deal a huge amount of damage to this boss and actually come out winning. Of course, it wasn't my first attempt and it took a little bit of refinement, but this build here performs relatively well against most bosses in the game and does a huge amount of heavy lifting for you, and is therefore a pretty good option if you're getting into Apocalypse level, playing and bosses and everything like that, and you need a little bit of help. Let's go. So when it comes to the archetypes and starting us off here, of course, as no surprise, we're using Engineer as our prime archetype because we want access to high tech. This allows us to overclock the turret and really pushes the damage that this tower can push out. And this is one of the reasons why this little turret performs so well, especially against bosses. Obviously, trash and things like that get absolutely shredded by this. And you definitely want to be thinking of using the Vulcan. When it comes to the three different turrets, I think the Vulcan is probably the most versatile since it has a really high fire rate that deals a whole bunch of damage, and it can hit close targets, far targets, air targets, whatever. But in a situation where you are, let's say, in a cramped quarters and you're going to be pushed by a lot of enemies that are coming up close and meleeing you, there's obviously nothing wrong with choosing the flamethrower. The flamethrower is really good at dealing with those kinds of situations and can actually CC a whole bunch of these enemies by setting them on fire, which is fantastic. I think the least sort of valuable one here is probably the impact cannon, and that's just because it's supposed to be super powerful and deal a whole bunch of damage, but comparably in terms of damage between that and the Vulcan, there's not that big a difference, and it of course comes with the major drawback of not having nearly the distance that the Vulcan can shoot. So that's basically it. Now furthermore, the other thing that really makes the Engineer archetype good before we move over to the second choice is just overall that Engineer ends up being a very tanky class for you to play. And we're going to be building this class to let the summons, or more specifically the turret, be the star of the build, but at the same time as well, we're going to make ourselves very tough and very hardy, meaning that when we do take hits, we're able to actually survive those and regenerate, or basically make our way out from there. And Engineer is a fantastic archetype for that. Now we're pairing this with Summoner, and obviously this is a pet build, so that's a no-brainer. We got to do that. And Summoner also increases your mod and skill damage with its Dominator perk, which is its damage perk over here. So again, this is going to feed some power into our turret and just make that deal a bit more damage, which is obviously fantastic. Furthermore, the Summoner archetype is also actually super tanky. So we have two very tanky archetypes here which complement each other very well, and which is going to give us a huge amount of survivability when we push this heavier content in Apocalypse difficulty, or some of the other difficulties. Now, both of the traits for these two complement this playstyle, where we have Fortify on the Engineer side, which basically increases our armor effectiveness, and we have Regrowth on the Summoner side, which gives us more health regeneration. So again, both of these giving us a whole bunch of additional sustain and just being able to survive in the fight for longer. Now when it comes to the minions that you choose on the Summoner side, I think it really depends on which area of the game you're in and pretty much which biome you're in. Definitely open areas favor having the flyers out more, since they can actually gain some elevation and they can shoot a bit. And obviously you don't really want them in tight corridors, things like the palace in Losum and stuff. They're not that great. They kind of clip on everything and it's not that awesome. In that case, it's better to use something like the Reaver. Reaver is super chunky, especially if you boost up his HP a little bit, and he is pretty good in tight quarters and can actually sometimes, take a lot of the heat off of you, and him combined with the turret are just going to push out a whole bunch of damage. Absolutely avoid these rolling balls of poo because, they're just not any good. Then moving us over to our character and looking at the armor, the rings, the weapons, everything like that. And let me just move my face out of the way here. We are actually using the Leto Mark 1. Now the Leto Mark 2 works perfectly well here as well. The difference between the two really being that the Leto Mark II ends up giving you more armor but less resistances, and the Leto Mark I gives you slightly less armor and more resistances. I think either one of these two are fine. I've been playing with the Leto Mark II a lot, so I kind of like just wanted to try something different, but it's really up to you. Either one of these are good, but when we do use the 4 pieces of the Leto Mark I, we end up with a really respectable armor amount of 301, and this is of course affected by things like traits and stuff like that, which we will look at just now. But this is a pretty substantial amount of damage reduction, you know, putting us right at around 60%. If we pop open this here, we'll see we actually at 64.1, and that's because we get some additional damage reduction from traits and stuff like that, which again, like I said, we'll look at. Now, our resistances all top out at 13, which is pretty damn sweet. If we were on the Leto Mark II, then our armor would be around 63 to 64% base damage reduction value, and our resistances would be sitting at 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. So this is just the two different sides of the coin, but again, this is dealer's choice here, right? Then when we look at the Relic, and this is really where the defensibility of this build starts to shine, we're using the Shielded Heart. The reason why we're using the Shielded Heart is because we're also going to be stacking our HP a little bit. And the Shielded Heart is really good for builds that have a high amount of HP, because it gives you a shield that's 100% of your max health. And this shield lasts for 20 seconds or until it's removed by, you know, you taking damage. Now, we have 150 health on this build, and that's because we're boosting it up with some rings and stuff, so that's going to give us a shield of 150. So most of the times you're going to enter a fight with a effective health bar of 300, which is fairly respectable. And because the build is so good at dealing damage and feeding that damage, you know, back to you as health, and also you just being kind of tanky, it means that you are generally going to be in a very good position in terms of like defensibility, and absolutely the Shielded Heart here, you know, plays into this a lot. Now, whichever skill shard you want to put into here, you know, whatever you've got available, I've just started unlocking the Mythic level 1, so I am putting Mythic skill cooldown in here, which, you know, allows me to get my turret and my summons back faster if something was to happen to them, if they die or something like that. I'm also using Mythic skill damage on here, which just makes my turret and my minions deal more damage, which is fantastic. And then I actually put healing effectiveness in here as well, because you'll see that we're actually using, you know, lifesteal and things like that to actually boost ourselves up, and this is going to increase the effectiveness of that lifesteal by 20%, which is pretty damn sweet. Now, the nice thing about this build is that your weapons don't really matter. I would say you need to pick weapons that suit you know, your playstyle and what you like to do. If you you know, like to put dots onto stuff, then of course the Merciless is always a good option. You know, this combined with Twisting Wounds in the mod slot is really going to put some nice bleeds on the enemies, and while you are concentrating on staying alive, every once in a while you just top up on some bleeds on the enemies, and basically you're good to go. If you like to play something a little bit more DPS-y, of course you can put in, you know, the stuff that people use on Hunter Gunslinger builds or something like that, or you can go completely passive and you know, make yourself a weapon that's got healing shot in it or something like that, and you actually use that to top up your minions or something. Or if maybe you're playing this build in a co-op situation, you can really become this support character that also has a little bit of bite, because you've got your minions, you've got your turret that deals damage, but you're also buffing up your buddies and healing them with healing shot and stuff like that. So really, this is absolutely your choice, and the same is true for the melee weapon, and the same is true for your offhand or your handgun or your side weapon or your side piece, whatever you want to call it. Now in this case here, what I've been using is Firestorm, and this is actually literally from the stream last night. I ended up starting to use this because of the way how it can lock down certain bosses, especially bosses that walk around and try to get to you, sub bosses, things like that. This can oftentimes just trap them inside this Firestorm as they're trying to get out of this eye of the Firestorm that's sucking them in, and all the while your minions are pelting them with skills and shots and everything, and your fucking turret is blasting them apart. So it's just all good stuff. But again, entirely up to you. I was also goofing around with, where is it now? I was goofing around with the Nebula, for instance, for a while as well, and shooting these nano swarms out. Those nano swarms basically fly everywhere and also help you to just, you know, take the trash down super fast. So really, it's up to you. Now, when we get to the rings and the amulets, I think this is probably the things that maybe make the build shine and make it work. But first and foremost, in the amulet slot, the Anchor of Power is really good for us here. This gives us a 15% increase to all damage, so your minions, your turret, your shots, everything. But it also doubles this damage for 15 seconds whenever you use a relic. Now, there's two reasons you're going to use a relic a lot. First of all, and probably the most important reason to use a relic a lot, is to actually make yourself tanky and make yourself survive damage, because you get this big old shield. The second reason why it's good to use your relic is because of the way how the engineer archetype works, and the fact that, and I need to find it here quickly. God damn, where is it? Here we go. So surplus, the perk here, basically says that whenever you use a relic, it refills 15% of your turret. And in the footage that's been running in the background, you'll sometimes see me use this relic even when I don't necessarily need it, but I use it to just top my ammo on my turret off a little bit, because I, for instance, don't have a what do you call it, overdrive, an overclock available to essentially push the damage of the turret. Remember that when your turret overdrives, right, when it overclocks, then it gets unlimited ammo for the amount of time, for those 25 seconds when it is, you know, a shooting. So it's best to, for instance, drop your turret down and then let it shoot out most of its mag, and then activate the overclock, which will then give you an unlimited mag for the rest of the time. And then when the turret eventually after that runs out of ammo, or basically is not overclocked anymore, runs out of ammo and despawns, you use your relic to just top your ammo up almost immediately, allowing you to almost immediately put down a turret again. So just good stuff. Now, in our first ring slot here, we're using Soul Guard, and this says that you gain a stack of Bulwark for each active summon. Now, we know that our damage reduction with this and the setup on the armor and everything here is sitting at just above 60%. So this is gonna, in the case of you using the Reaver and the turret, it's gonna give you 10. It's going to give you, there's diminishing returns on Bulwark, so it's not exactly 10. I think it's closer to like 8% or something like that. But it's going to give you additional damage reduction. In the case of you using the turret and 2 flyers, that's even more. It goes to about 12 to 13%. So this is just giving you even more survivability and inching us ever close to that cap of 80. Next, Soul Link. This is probably the secret sauce of the build. And that's because Soul Link says that your summons lifesteal 5% of base damage dealt, which returns to the wearer as health. Meaning, in layman's terms, and you'll see this in the footage in the background, when my turret opens up and fucking lays waste to enemies or shoots, you know, the Night Weaver or something like that, and I have, you know, damage on me, you heal so fast. This fucking overflows you with health. And if you are relatively okay with dodging, which is like me, I'm not able to dodge every single attack in the game, but I get, you know, so let's say a 50% dodge ratio, then this is going to basically make you immortal, because as long as you're avoiding some of the damage, your turret is going to top you up with HP so much that basically the only thing that can kill you is one-shot attacks, of which there are, of course, in the game. There are enemies in the game that can one-tap you, but luckily that's not such a common thing, and so therefore this is really good. Now, the other side thing that Soul Link doesn't tell you is Soul Link actually heals your other summons as well. So this, in combination with some of the other things that we're doing, is actually going to keep your Reaver or your Flyer guys topped up as well, because this is often the problem, right? Your minions take a lot of damage, especially against bosses, and bosses can usually flatten them out quite easily. But this is going to give them a little bit of, you know, like toughness, and, you know, keep them in the fight basically. Then for our third ring, we're using Seal of the Empress, which gives us max health, an increase of 20, and reduces our stamina by 10. Now, that's not that big a deal, and when we get to the last ring, you'll understand why. But we're giving ourselves 20 additional HP, and that takes us from 130 after our traits to 150. And that's how we basically, now you can of course use some other rings here and get yourself even higher, maybe 160, 170, 180, but 150 is good, because once we apply the relic, we're sitting on like effective 300 HP, which is really damn good, especially with all of our damage reduction. Our last ring here is another kind of like linchpin in the thing here, because you would have, at the point where I was going through the armor, you would have probably been like, bro, you're using armor that puts your weight at 95. You are not going to be able to dodge anything. So what are you talking about staying alive and staying out of trouble? Well, this is the ring that allows you to do that. And again, in the footage in the background right now, you can see that I'm dodging like no problemo while wearing this exact setup, right? So in this case, right, you are able to get the same evade roll regardless of what your armor encumbrance is, and this is what kind of like makes this work. This is how we can wear the heaviest armor, whether it's Leto Mark 1, whether it's Leto Mark 2. So without this, you would need to supplement this some other way. Like you would need to, you know, put some more points into like the trait that lowers your weight encumbrance. We're going to get to traits just now. Or you're gonna have to wear lighter armor, because you are going to have to be able to still dodge roll. Unfortunately, you know, flopping the whole time is not gonna help. Then moving us over to our traits and pretty much the last part here, of course, we have Fortify and Regrowth, which we've already discussed. This comes automatically with the 2 selections of the archetypes we've picked. I go ahead and put 8 points into Kinship, which gives me 64% damage reduction on friendly fire, and this is to other players, but it's also to your minions. Plus, you yourself also receive, you know, 64% less damage. Now, if you are always playing solo and you don't, you know, you don't really care about this, then yes, you could maybe take this away. But in testing this, you'll also see that this makes a huge difference in situations where you are dealing with a chaotic fight. You've got a turret out, you've got your minion out, you're using Merciless, for example, or you're using Firestorm. All of these things can damage your minion. They can also damage you. And first, and not first and foremost, but one other thing that is super important to remember is you can actually walk into the line of fire of your turret. And if that turret is overclocked and you walk into the line of fire, a couple of those bullets can really sting. So you absolutely could benefit from putting at least some points into this. Maybe 64% is slightly overkill, but I'll let you guys test that and see. But I would absolutely advise some points in this, because shit does get a little bit chaotic out there, and you could actually die to friendly fire, or you could potentially kill someone else in friendly fire if you're playing co-op. Then absolutely in every build that I do swiftness. I like the additional movement speed. It's huge. I don't know why you wouldn't take that. And then of course we take vigor to give ourselves another 30 health. So we start the game with 100 health. We take vigor, that gets us to 130, and then we've got Seal of the Empress, gets us to 150. That's it. Now in endurance, these 2 points are automatically in here, so we don't do anything to that, you know, fuck stamina. And then we're taking expertise because we again want to reduce our skill cooldowns by 20%. So we want our turret back as fast as possible if it's on cooldown, and if our minions do happen to die, whether it's the Fly or the Reaver, we want to be able to resummon them as fast as we can. Bark Skin is a no-brainer. That gives us another 10% of damage reduction. Of course, damage reduction is, I don't know if it's 100% fixed now, but most recently the patches that we've been seeing have been addressing this and trying to, you know, make damage reduction work better, because at the launch version damage reduction was broken and you were almost, in a way, I wouldn't say able to stack it infinitely, but it was way easier to overstack it and actually achieve a higher damage reduction than 80%. So it's got some diminishing returns now, so this is just going to help you get ever closer to that 80 cap. Last but not least, we have Rugged on here, which increases our minion health by 100%. On the Flyers, this is noticeable. On the Reaver, this is super noticeable. He goes from a fairly tanky boy to a fucking stud muffin that just does not take any damage and shrugs off everything. So this is again good. Very much like I said when it came to Kinship, you can play with these two and see maybe 100% is slightly overkill. Maybe you can get away with something like 70 or 80, which frees up 1 or 2 or 3 points that you could maybe put somewhere else. Maybe you're the kind of person that does want more stamina or something like that. You can absolutely do that. And as mentioned, lastly, we also have Siphoner, which gives us 3% base damage as lifesteal. And this is going to add on to that lifesteal that we get from, you know, the Soul Link and everything. And this is just going to make us overall just get a shitload of life once our little minion army is doing their business and killing and shooting everything and acting the fool. We're going to be getting a whole bunch of life, but it's also going to allow us to just, you know, in a situation where maybe the turret's on a cooldown and maybe, you know, our minions have been killed, we can use our own weapons as well to also just top ourselves off and give ourselves a little bit more survivability with that lifesteal. And that right there, ladies and germs, is the build. Have fun with it. Let me know what you would do to change it, and, you know, how you've made it better and how you find this build. This build is super strong and consistent in Apocalypse. If you use it on any lower difficulty, this thing will take you all the way from the very beginning till the end. I played through an entire run of, I think it was Veteran, and this shit was like Snoresville. I was literally drinking beer and watching like series on Netflix while I was doing it. It was hyper easy. So if you're the kind of person that's not looking to jump into Apocalypse, but you still want to be able to have like a really sick, strong build, maybe hang out with your buddies in co-op, this thing fucking slaps. So I think that's how the kids say it. By the way, if you found this video useful in any way, please go ahead and give it a like, give it a comment, something like that. It really does help the channel grow. We're starting to amass a little bit of numbers here, and it's fantastic. If you enjoy content like this, think about subbing to the channel. I have a ton more Remnant 2 content coming, but this is also a variety channel, so there will be other games coming as well. There's a whole bunch of new games coming out in the very next month that will get covered by this channel. So even if you're not a Remnant 2 G, or maybe you are getting a little bit tired of the game, buckle up, because we got a whole bunch more stuff coming. But other than that, super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Till next video, fucking cheers.